All right. Well, welcome, Dr. Christopher Pratt. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Let's start with why you decided to become a medical writer.
So I can kind of back up and start from the beginning. I got into science because I wanted to learn about all the diseases. And so when I started my PhD, I wanted to study cell biology because cells basically underlie all the diseases. And as I went through that, I had an excellent mentor. My PhD advisor really, I don't know if he intended it, but he left me with some communications practices like hook people in the beginning when you do your talks. Like, don't just say, "Oh, cancer is bad." Say, "Lung cancer kills 125,000 people a year," and really get people invested. And as I progressed through my career through PhD, and then to the end of my PhD, I had my first child. And as I was then in my postdoc after that, I realized I am kind of burning out of doing bench work. I still love learning about science and kind of explaining science to other people, but it became clear to me that I was wanted to do something that wasn't as much of the lab labor. And it was about then when another postdoc left the lab to join a medcoms agency that I first heard of medical writing. So that was something that was kind of rattling in my brain as I finished up my postdoc. And then in the fall of 2019, one of my former lab mates from my PhD approached me and said, "Hey, my company is looking for a medical writer. You should interview for the position." And so I decided, okay, I'll do that. And I interviewed for it, and they ghosted me. I didn't get the job, but it was enough to be like, all right, I'm going to stop doing the postdoc now because this experience made it clear that writing is writing and science communication is what I'm interested in, rather than continuing on the academic track.
Yeah. And the question I have for you there is how long, at that point, how many years were you into the postdoc?
So this was at about 2 years.
Hmm. And so once they ghosted you and you didn't get that first position, what was the next step you took once you decided, well, this is a path I want to explore?
So I was in a very, I understand I was in a very privileged position. So I had a then 3-year old, and and I had been working in a very unusual way because childcare is so expensive. It was almost as if like if I were doing a postdoc, sending my child to daycare would have eaten like 2/3, 3/4 of what I would take home. So I actually spent my postdoc working kind of odd hours. So my wife is she's a nurse anesthetist, so she was working kind of 3 12-hour shifts a week. So I would basically go to the lab in the evenings on those 3 days and then go to the lab the 4 other days of the week. So I'd be at the lab on weekends and all that so that could minimize the cost of childcare. And so that probably contributed to my lab burnout as well. But essentially, after I got that incepted, went through that interview process, I'm like, all right, so continue doing the postdoc this way is not going to be conducive to strategically planning a career change. So I resigned from my postdoc the next week. And then, of course, like the next month is when COVID was first announced, and then early 2020, of course, when all the shutdowns came, I was in the midst of planning my career change.
Ah, yes. And it's always good to have, some kind of, especially with career changes, they're so dicey. It depends. If you're single, can be really
Yeah.
challenging because you don't have anybody necessarily to support you. So I like that you acknowledge that you did have somebody that was, to help you out. And also, but I also think I want to commend you on the fact that you were also thinking about childcare, right? I think that people don't sometimes talk about that part of it, that it is an expensive venture to have kids and taking care of them. So thank you for sharing that. So moving into your switch into medical writing, I know now you run your own company, right?
Yes.
Did you end up working for a company before you started your own, or you decided to just go ahead and start?
So kind of both.
Okay.
So one thing that's nice about freelancing and the way that it works in the US is you can just literally just start and you have your own company that's you. This is where the having a 3-year-old child really played into it, because when COVID happened, it was like, okay, so full-time role is off the table for me for the foreseeable future. So I actually started freelancing and exploring freelance options then. So basically during this transition period, so late 2019, early 2020, I just did a lot of LinkedIn networking and talking to people that I had met in my past in research, and meeting new people and information gathering about medical writing, and then exploring freelance job boards like Upwork and sites like that. And actually got my first client freelance through Upwork. It was a reagents company, so they made like fluorescent dyes and things. And so I managed to pitch them about writing blog posts about like microscopy and other applications for fluorescent dyes. And then through networking, I got a couple of freelance gigs with medical marketing agencies. And so that was kind of my first go. And then in 2021, a recruiter approached me about a full-time role. And at that point, when the vaccines had become available and things were starting to look less grim, I went through the interview process. I went through 4 rounds of interviews. I got the job and I started full-time. And so I worked at this healthcare PR company for just under 2 years. I have freelancing before and after, because I would say the experience at the marketing agency was so crucial for learning about how marketing works. Because I'd say the first time freelancing, I'd have a client and it would be great, and then the contract would end and then I would have nothing. And so I really learned the importance of kind of always be marketing as a freelancer. And so afterwards, my work at the full-time ended because of a restructuring that eliminated my position. I decided to go all into freelance. I started Quill Science at that point and decided to go all into this direction.
That's so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. I also enjoy the fact that you talked about, I really enjoy the fact that you talked about, you had a full-time role that helped you learn the skills. I think that sometimes is, especially in the kind of era that we live in, every time I turn on YouTube, there's somebody on there that's talking about quit your 9 to 5 and go make $1 million, right? And sometimes the problem I personally have with that message is, well, the 9 to 5 can actually teach you a lot of really valuable skills that can then let you run a more successful business, especially if you were being paid. Basically, you were being paid to work, but you were also being paid to learn. And so your example of, you were a freelancer who didn't know you had to always be marketing, but once you had worked with this marketing agency, was a learning opportunity for you. I think that that's a grand lesson in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the way I think about it is like the full-time is like you have your one role. So in my case, it was medical strategy, and then you have other people that are doing all the business development. But part of what I had to do at the PR agency was contribute to pitches. So I got to see how the business works. And it's like, okay, so there's no time when the business is full. It's just always pitching for new things. And then it's like, okay, if the business wins a bunch of new business, then they get more talent on board. So it's kind of reacting that way. And so, so my plan when I joined was like, I can do this for, 3 to 5 years and then go freelance. And then when I faced a layoff, that just accelerated my plans. I'm like, all right, no time like the present. And kind of taking that and turning it into an opportunity, because with the layoff, I got a month of severance and unemployment money. So I was like, okay, I have a little bit of a cushion while I work hard to get this freelance business off the ground.
Right. So you go and then you start your own business. And so I want to say this was what, 2021? You said 22?
So 2023 is when I started Quill Science. So I was at the agency from 2021 to 23.
Yeah. So you've been running your business for almost 2 years full time.
That's wild. I didn't think of it that way until you just said it.
I'm always amazed at that. Even though I was a freelancer for a while on my own too, I always like to congratulate people on that, because running a business by yourself is not easy. So congratulations.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'm going to say it's a huge surprise to me, because back in my college days, I was the science major that turned their nose up at the business majors. and now all the business stuff is pretty important to how I have to operate. Like now I recognize that you have to incorporate business into the scientific enterprise in order to even get science advanced and done.
Every other Friday, I send out an email newsletter to about 3,000 PhDs and academics on tips, tools, and resources that you can use to build a career you love. And I'm inviting you to join us. You can go to theboldphd.com/careers list. Again, that's theboldphd.com/careers list. Let's get back into the episode. And which is slowly segueing into like the next part of our conversation. People don't realize that science, the pharmaceutical industry, it's all a business, right? Even within academia, it's all a business. And if there's no money, things do not run, right? And so when people have this pushback, oh, I don't want to do things for money. I'm like, yes, it sounds like a really good idea in theory, but in reality, that's not how it works. So let's talk about which kind of clients do you serve at Quill Science?
So I have a mix of clients. Most of my, well, first of all, it can vary sometimes based on like the quarter or the year. So most of my clients right now are actually like medical education and marketing agencies. So one thing that became really clear to me with the layoff is that there is an abundance of work in med ed and promo. It's just that it kind of jumps from one agency to another. So on the whole, the market is large, but an individual agency, it can be very up and down. And one thing that PhDs definitely have that's unique is the scientific background and the ability to really break down problems into manageable pieces. And so that's what makes PhDs really powerful at these agencies. So I positioned Quill Science, I pitched to these agencies basically, hey, you have new business, you need scientific skill because your meager scientific team is already stretched across 1 million accounts. And I mean, that was based on my own experience in the agency. There were, I think, 5 scientists in the agency supporting 200, 300 people. So I positioned myself there to agencies to basically be extra help as you need it. And then I've also been pitching to like startups, early and mid-stage startups that could use extra help in communicating their science, because at that point, a lot of companies are a lot of scientists and they want to focus on doing the experiments to get the data that they want. They don't want to focus so much on the grant writing or even communicating science, talking to stakeholders. So I've been positioning myself there. So I've been helping some companies directly in those kinds of capacities as well.
Let's talk about how you find these people to pitch them and how are you pitching them?
So I've used a few different approaches. One that's been really helpful is just simply networking, essentially being visible and then getting approached. If people say, hey, I see your content and we have something that we're developing, we could use help really kind of clarifying the message that we want to talk about. So content marketing on LinkedIn's been kind of my best tool. And then through networking, as I kind of subcontract with other agencies. So I also do like life sciences marketing. So I've done like brochures for the companies that I used to buy stuff from when I was in research. And so I subcontract to another agency. So then they basically have jobs that they throw my way. So I have a few different streams.
So content marketing through LinkedIn and then subcontracting. I want to talk about both. So I love LinkedIn. LinkedIn has paid off in bucket loads for me, and I highly recommend anybody to use it. There's a lot of pushback sometimes from different generations on LinkedIn, but I find that it's one of the best because there are a lot of decision makers on there every single day, hiring managers on there every single day. And where else can you get that but LinkedIn? There's no other competing platform, I would say, in that regard. So when you say you do content marketing on LinkedIn, what does that look like?
Yeah, so this is very much a building the airplane as it flies kind of situation, because it's a lot of experimentation, which is great for scientists because basically it's just a different kind of experimenting.
Test and see works, right?
Yeah. So essentially I've been trying to take what I learned at the marketing agency, like, okay, what are the pain points that companies are facing? Like, for example, for agencies, like, okay, you don't have enough scientific acumen because you have a few scientists in your agency, but maybe they're working on 10 accounts already and they don't have time to help you with I don't know, like a new business proposal, or you have some additional things that you need done. You just want someone that can focus on this. So I kind of try to write LinkedIn posts that kind of allude either implicitly or explicitly to these pain points, and then also post like science news and my own perspective on it, basically to show, oh, this Chris guy does independent analysis of the industry and the science, so the perspective will be useful, because that's what a lot of clients really want. Is they don't just want someone to like basically be told to write a brochure and then do it. They want someone to also bring perspectives, be like, hey, have you considered doing it this way? And that I find to be like the most rewarding part about freelancing, is just the ideas and kind of partnering with other people to kind of get new ideas across the finish line and really amplify and elevate the ask.
So you go in, you think about the pain points that you think these companies may have, you write about those, and do people then contact you directly? Do you have to, I know you do pitchings, there's that. So pitching is, for those listening and who don't know what pitching is when you send a message to a company that says, I have these services, do you need me? Right? That's a gist of it. But do you have people also contacting you through your LinkedIn posts or as a result of your LinkedIn post to work with you?
Yeah, I have both. So one thing that I try to avoid is, like, of course, I'm sure you've had the experience, and a lot of people do, where you get a connection request and it's just immediately someone pitching something to you that may or may not be relevant. And I don't want to be that person. So when I connect, I don't go directly into a pitch. I don't try to sell somebody on a thing. I try to just build rapport and just kind of, if we're connected, then they'll see my posts and kind of passively see what I offer, and they'll reach out back out to me if they feel like they have a need, or I'll just periodically remind them. What I'm trying to work on now is actually a newsletter. That's something that's been on my to-do list for months now, basically as a way to, as a kind of a gentle reminder to people, like, oh, I'm here, so if you need any help, like, send me a message, because I don't want to be an aggressive salesperson.
Yeah, I get that. Makes sense. Okay. So content marketing, and then you said you subcontract for agencies. So the way I understand subcontracting is that there's a company, they have tons of work. But the people, like you had mentioned, they had 5 people serving like 200 clients, you said? Something
like 200, like a 200 person agency, and only 5 of them were able to do as a science first agency. And yet there's only 5 out of 200 that are providing the scientific services.
Yeah. And so something like that, they're also finding you through LinkedIn, or you're reaching out to them as well to take the extra work.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all been through networking. Like, you just build a rapport with people, and they'll think of you.
Yeah. So one of the things I've learned about business is you build, it's going back to the whole era of quit your 9 to 5 and go and get $1 million business. They're boring parts of businesses, and we're talking about these parts right here, right? Like parts that they don't look flashy or attractive, but you do them every day to build a business. So yes, absolutely. These are some of the mechanics of that. Let's talk a little bit, to shift gears and talk a little bit about tools you like to use in your work.
Yeah, so I will say, and I will shout this from the rooftops, like Zotero is the thing I couldn't live without, because it helps me organize all my sources, and it helps me with the fact checking, because I essentially, when I write claims in the pieces that I make, I use the Zotero notes to link it back to a specific point in a published paper or a website. And so Zotero has really been my can't live without tool. And then for writing, I use Grammarly Premium. I find that to be immensely useful, even though it sometimes comes up with very silly recommendations. So you don't use everything that it says, but what it does add is it'll highlight areas that maybe could use a little work, maybe a little bit more clarity. So even just having it direct my attention to some points in my writing is immensely helpful. And then I've also been experimenting with kind of AI tools. I don't use AI to draft things, but I will actually like sometimes take a draft and have AI challenge me, like, okay, what are some, like, basically telling the robot to poke holes in the thing. And that often just kind of like Grammarly will kind of direct me to look at certain aspects and be like, all right, is there something that I'm missing in this strategy?
Hey, did you know that I speak to and train groups at universities, colleges, and professional organizations on the topics I cover on this channel? I do. So if your group would like to bring me in virtually or in person to cover intentional career design, personal branding that builds your career, careers within scientific communications or biotech, go to theboldphd.com/speaking. Yeah, absolutely. Finding gaps that you could potentially address, right? That's really helpful. Any specific AI tools you like?
So lately I've been using Perplexity. I like that one because it provides sources, so you can. It makes it really easy to vet it because, and I heard this from another person that I chat with on LinkedIn. Treat AI like an over enthusiastic intern. So it's like it's going to make mistakes, but it's going to be extremely confident.
Yeah.
So basically, take it but verify. And I like Perplexity because that gives you it cites its sources. And so you can go to the source and immediately tell if it's a hallucination or not, because sometimes it'll link you to something that has nothing to do with what it said. So so verify, but it's definitely a time saver in a lot of respects.
Yeah. Great, great, great. Thanks for sharing. Perplexity. I know I recently started playing with Perplexity a few months ago. I had heard about it, but not really used it. And then another guest on this podcast had talked about it, and I started playing with it. So it's nice. I like it too. But ultimately, it's on you as the human to go and check and recheck things, make sure everything is accurate. Are there any resources? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that I've actually found Perplexity to be really useful for is like if I'm trying to figure out potential companies that could use my services, like you can ask Perplexity, say like, you could basically tell it a few sentences about what you do, and then you say, can you give me a list of companies based in location? Maybe it's like that recently got like Series B funding. You can kind of give it all these parameters and then have it give you a list of companies that you go through and verify. But I feel like you can do that a lot better than like just using a Google search.
Yeah, that's a smart way of using it for sure. Thanks for that. That's a helpful nugget. I'll try that for other things. Um, so I want to talk about resources. One of the things I like to do on this podcast is just ask people for resources that have been helpful to them as they build their career. You had a good career with the in-house for about 2 years. You've been building your business for 2 years. Clearly, something is going well for you, and there has to be resources that have been useful to you. So, are there any books or courses that you have found helpful in your journey?
So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I got a bit enthusiastic there. So for prospecting and marketing, I found Elise Bennon's resources to be really useful. Elise Bennon and Austin Church, like their posts on LinkedIn, have been really helpful. And just the habit of basically get your marketing done in the morning. Just do it. Just do a half hour of it, because it's like going to the gym. It's like one of those things where it's like if you put it off to the end of the day, you'll either run out of willpower, or you'll find some reason to not do it. So just get up and get your coffee and do marketing. And Elise's courses and her simplest marketing plan really kind of breaks it down into like actions that really kind of help. Because in freelance medical writing, I've found that it's like you have to kind of take pieces from a lot of different industries. You have to take advice from people who are like just like kind of copywriters and people who are professional marketers. But again, I feel like the biggest learning has been the 2 years at a marketing agency. There's just so much that you see, and you work with people of such different backgrounds. Like I remember being in my first like strategy meeting, and it's like it's me, one other science person, and then it's like a journalist and like a decades experienced marketer, and just the ideas that come from these different backgrounds. Like I would not have thought of presenting chronic kidney disease in the way that Bob just explained it.
I worked in a marketing agency just like that. when I went at the beginning, towards the beginning of my career in 2021 to 2022. And you're right. I learned so much, especially from my journalist. My boss was a journalist at this agency, and she was self-taught in science. And I realized that a lot of the things, like even now with this podcast, right? One of the things I try to do is find a special angle for every single episode. I learned that from the journalist boss, because she would always say something like, well, you're writing this story, you're writing this article, whatever it is, but what's the angle, right? What's the thing you're going to hook people with? And
Yeah,
that has been, nobody teaches you that in science.
it's true.
Nobody teaches you that in science. And so learning that you have to find a hook, you have to find an angle that gets people drawn in, and then you give them what you have written was was very helpful. Something that I really learned. So yes, if you can expose yourself to these experiences, please do. For somebody that is thinking of coming into what you're doing, like starting their, or maybe they're postdoc, maybe they're PhD student, maybe they're master's student, they're thinking about starting their own business after, their program, or after they finish whatever it is they're doing right now. What advice would you give them in 2025?
So I would say that you have a lot of the skills that you need to do it. You might not notice it. Amy has said, like PhD students, postdocs, like you've probably written grant applications. So you know how to take an idea and kind of put an action plan to it. You've looked at the constraints and the requirements of the grant. So running a business, I mean, has a lot of parallels. Like you have to go figure out things like, oh, what are the constraints, like taxes and the menial things behind it. But essentially the most important thing is like you have an idea and you have a target market, like who it's going to benefit. And in grants, that would be like, what's the broader impact? It's pretty similar. And you know how to take problems and break them down into pieces so you can address it. Also, nothing happens alone. Like Quill Science is literally just me, but that doesn't mean that I'm working alone. Like I have a healthy network. I have people that I ask for advice on certain things. Really, the most important thing I feel like is having a good network. Just like in the strategy rooms in the marketing agency where you have different ways of thinking that all come together, like having a healthy network that you can talk to and that you just like even have like catch-up chats with is immensely useful. So yeah, find mentors and break down problems. And if me, a person absolutely disinterested in business until I had to become interested in business, can do it, then like I think a lot of people can. I guess it just comes down to like if that's what you want to do. That's kind of what separates in-house from freelance or consulting. Is essentially in-house you have someone else do the business development, you get the assignments and you get to work that way, whereas freelance, like I have to go do the business development, I have to go do the finances, I have to go do all the things of operating a business. And it turns out I enjoy it because I get to tweak things, and I guess I'm kind of going on a little bit of an aside now, but I think
It's great.
one of the biggest rewards about having my own business is like I can kind of indirectly, or actually quite directly, like support my community. Like for example, if I want merchandise, like I have a t-shirt printer down the street who's like a small business, and I'm much more motivated now to support small businesses wherever I can. So like I have local vendors for things like that, and I really enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah. No, you make such a great point. As you begin to run your own business, you begin to learn that, this is why we should support each other, right? Especially when you see a fellow small business owner. And so that's so great. This has been such a great conversation, Chris. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to get to talk with you and add value to your audience.
Absolutely. If people want to find you, where can they go?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Christopher Pratt, and with a PhD, so that separates me from some other guys with my name. And my company website is quillscience.com, and that has all the links as well.
Okay. And I'll make sure to include that in the episode show notes. Thank you so much, Chris.
Perfect. Thank you.